All right, there she is. Jessica Soffer, book number two. Yeah?
Book
How you
number
feel?
two. I feel good. I mean, it's a funny time because it's so antithetical, as you know, being a writer and then being an author. So it feels I
Ah,
have
ah,
butterflies all the time.
yeah.
I'm not sleeping. I'm trying to put on a different hat and just kind of enjoy it because it's a really special time. But it's pretty wild for those of
Yeah.
us who are deeply introverted and spend a lot of time alone with one's animals.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, so for our viewers and listeners, as I speak to Jessica, her book will be out in 2 weeks. So she's in that. I remember when I had my last book was coming out, my wife noticed that I was always strumming my fingers, and she's like, it's coming. Just stop strumming your fingers, please. Because it
This
kind of
drumming
feels
helps.
like, go ahead.
This drumming helps. I mean, we all have to find our ways of coping, I imagine.
Well, and it's such a weird thing because you brought up something which I think is really interesting about this work we do, which is the work itself. It couldn't be more internal, quiet, alone. I mean, if you want to be a writer, you better like being alone. Like it better be almost how you prefer to be. Would you say that's fair?
I think it's so true. And not only do we have to like it, but we have to preserve it. I think at a certain point, it's not just what we enjoy doing and maybe what's natural to who we are, but it's essential that we contain space so that we can have the freedom to be creative.
Yep.
I was talking to a friend recently who's also a mother, and she was saying that the hardest part for her, and she's a creative, the hardest for her about being a mother is that you don't have the whole trajectory of creative thought during the course of the day because either someone is sick at school or someone needs a snack. And so I think it's really important as writers, as creatives of any sort, to just put up limits when you can, when and where you
Oh,
can.
are you a mother yourself?
I am.
Okay, so I raised a couple kids. My wife and I are both creatives, and I have a lot of clients who, particularly women, who have trouble with those barriers. Like especially if they didn't, you grew up, we're going to get to your background, which is atypical for a lot of writers,
Mhm.
in that for good or bad, there it was. Um, but most of them are come to it later in life, particularly the women, and they just because they were so trained to look after people and identity coming around, which is beautiful in certain ways, like caring for people. Like, don't have kids if you don't like taking care of people, right? But you got to be able to shut the door and say, "I love you, not now." And it's
Yeah,
it's it's tough for some people.
it is tough. I find though that it also can be very freeing to know that you have a set amount of time in which to
Yeah,
be to
yeah,
find the inspiration. Because I think I- I've had students who, let's say, are in an MFA program and they have just hours a day to sit with themselves and sit with the writing,
yeah,
and you kind of get caught in the muck of yourself. And
yeah.
so it's really nice to a certain degree. Not always is it nice, but sometimes it's really nice to know I have 2 hours. I have to crank on this. And
Right.
then it's,
Let's get going. In fact, I've told this story before on this podcast, but I spent years when I Author Magazine when I started it for a while, for years, I did 5 days a week, 400 word essay every day for the magazine. And this was I often started with nothing. And my technique, because I was doing other stuff, was you got 40 minutes. You got 40 minutes to do it. And that so helped me because the perfectionist, because I got that going on a little bit, said just couldn't do it. Just I saw all the work, all the essays as one body of work that I was just gradually getting better. And it was so helpful because I wrote some stuff that I was really pleased with and did not think I could have done so quickly had I just said, just get it. Come on, Bill. Don't question it. Just go and see what happens.
I think that's really brilliant. For a long time, I really believed in the kind of whimsy and the open-endedness necessary to create. For a long time, I really kind of clung to that and thought you have to be in the perfect mental state, you have to be in the perfect physical state in which to create.
Yeah.
And then I think I spent a long time just in that spiral. And this book, this love story, tripled in length in 3 months. And
What?
that's because I made this ridiculous schedule with a word count. And it's so funny because I think my previous self would have said, you're undermining your creativity, you're undermining the process. What happens to the kind of natural progression of things when you're living according to a schedule? And I actually found the schedule to be so freeing. I think creative constraints are life-giving.
They certainly can be if you don't get in your own way and tense up and all this kind of thing. Well, that's very interesting. Okay, so as I mentioned, I want to get to This Is a Love Story, which is a very interesting book, unusual book. Congratulations, by the way, beautiful. You should I hope you're proud of it. You should be. You should be. But like I said, you had an unusual upbringing. What was atypical about it is that your parents were artists and successful ones at that, it sounds like, which is, and I'm sure they could tell you, or they told you that they probably didn't come from a similar background. They probably grew out of families that were not full of artists.
Absolutely. I mean, my last name Soffer means scribe. So my father was an Iraqi Jew, the son of a scribe. So artful in its way, but he grew
Right,
up in Baghdad. Um, and I think there was a lot of art in his upbringing. I think there was a lot of beauty. And his entire life was a working artist. So he
right,
was also a landlord in order to create art.
right,
My mother had many full-time jobs. I mean, I think she had at least two when I was growing up. She worked in publishing in order to also write true crime, and
right.
and she's a not now she's a novelist with a book out recently that has done so well. And I think it's an interesting thing. I mean, it has only been very recently that I've given up my sort of day job, which is teaching. And that's probably not forever, but I feel like as a mother of a young child and just where I am right now, something had to give.
Absolutely.
And of course, I'm hoping to make this work so that I don't have a million jobs. I work for an interior designer for, I did all the things as we all
Right.
do all the things, but I did grow up with this awareness of creativity as the kind of highest form. So my parents structured their lives and my life in order to maintain that and kind of placed a hierarchical measure on things with creativity at the very, very top.
Yeah. It's not the case for a lot of families. A lot of the writers I know or the students grew up in families where the when the person says, I'd like to be an artist of any kind, and in fact, there's a side of my wife's family where the father, very successful businessman, but they look, one of the grandchildren is wants to be a professional flute player. She's getting her PhD, and they look kind of askance at it. Like, what are you crazy? You got other plans, right? Like that's not all you're going to do, and it's tough. But it does ask the artist to say, if you care about it, you care about it, whether your parents care about it or not. Maybe that's the helpful side of it, right?
Yeah, I mean, I know what a gift it was to grow up in the house I grew up in. And I
Right.
think now having my own child, my father, for example, didn't believe in coloring books. He thought that they really curtailed creativity. And so I wasn't allowed to have coloring.
Oh, that's so weird.
It's really funny. And I think in certain ways it developed a kind of freedom, a lack of insecurity, and a real kind of boldness to the way that things can be drawn, written, viewed, all the things. So now it's funny when my daughter is working in coloring books, I at once have such immense joy because I was never allowed to have one as a child. But simultaneously, I wonder how much I'm undercutting her full creative potential.
Am I crying? Well, let me tell you, I colored in coloring books, and I'm about as creative as they can be.
Yeah, look at you
I'm
go.
speaking for
Okay,
myself.
perfect example. I'm so glad.
Oh yeah. So, all right. So when you said not to put you on the couch, but when you realized you looked up at some point, and you probably were writing from early on. You probably read and wrote and okay. When you thought this is what I want to do, was there any sense of not competition, but comparing yourself to your parents, or did you feel very free and like this is my own thing and they'll just support me? And how did
Yeah,
that?
that's a nice question. I felt very distinct in my wanderings from them.
Mhm.
My mother has an MFA in English Lit, but she sort of came to her full creative potential later in life.
Ah,
She only
okay.
now is really, I think, embodying it. And my father was, he was so like out there. I mean, he was a full creative. He lived on an entirely different planet than anybody else, completely obtuse. And so I kind of just went my own way. I feel very lucky now. Um, that it was very clear to me early on that this is what I wanted to do. And so I studied creative writing in college. I applied to an MFA while I was still in college. I worked on what sort of became my first novel while I was getting my MFA. I mean, I had a pretty direct route, which is
Yeah.
a really wonderful thing, not to question oneself
Yeah.
along the way.
Yeah. And you had to do other stuff. Obviously, you had to make a living. But you've written a lot of short form stuff for magazines. And do you like that as well? Or is it more of a pay the bills thing, or is it a kind of an interesting way to do some writing where you're not deep in the forest of the novel?
It's very satisfying. I mean, I come from short form writing. I believed myself to be a short story writer before I
Mm,
worked on a
okay.
novel, and was sort of told there's no future in that. It's just a really hard thing to publish. And so I kind of forced myself into the novel form. And then when my first book came out, it was kind of a publicity thing to do these short form pieces. And I really loved it. My first book was about food. And so I did a lot of food writing. I had a column. And I so enjoyed it. I don't know what's happening this time around. I've written a couple of pieces and they are falling entirely flat. I think it could be that I've given everything to this book and I'm actually giving everything to the next book that I'm working
Yeah.
on now.
Yeah.
And so there's just not that much space and energy. And I think also it's changed. I mean, when Apricots came out, my first book, there were much more resources. There were many more places, opportunities to place work that had a personal slant. And now it feels like the scope gets smaller and smaller for these
Oh,
sorts of.
that's depressing to learn. I hope maybe we're just in a transition phase, but obviously the way people share their work is quickly evolving.
Yeah,
There's no doubt about it. Okay, so this is a love story. Um, the two things I find most interesting when talking to, because I don't know, our listeners, maybe they've read your book, maybe they haven't. So it's hard to say. I mean, you take an unusual approach in a lot of ways to this book. The thing I always find most interesting is starting where things begin and where things fell apart. I always want to know. So this one, it's like a love poem. It's like a love letter in a lot of ways to love and to a specific place where I assume you grew up, spent some time as a kid.
I did. I spent a lot of time in Central Park. I imagine that's what you're talking about is Manhattan.
Yes, yeah,
Yeah. So it is a love letter. It is a love letter to love, and it is a love letter to Central Park. It's the story of this couple, an artist and a writer, from the time they meet until the very end of their relationship 50 years later.
yeah,
And I worked on that just to sort of move it back to craft a little. I worked on their story for many years, and eventually it started to feel way too narrow in scope and
uh-huh,
just limited. And so I started thinking about the ways in which that love story was only part of the greater love story, right? Every love story is reliant and complicated and supported by other loves. And so that's when I brought in the character of their son, who has a perspective, who has a very complicated relationship with love and sort of can't find his way through it. And then also a young woman who's a writer who gets in the middle of the relationship between the two central characters. And then the Central Park character, which really is a character and kind of sees them through all the most important moments of their life, but also there are literally hundreds of characters that come in and out of Central Park that we see in moments of love, the beginning of love, the end of love, mourning love, all the things.
yeah.
So it is a love letter. It is a love letter to a lot of love.
Yeah. Well, good for you. Good for you. There was a time not that fairly recently when I watch film one movie every week with my wife and kid and we did. And and there was a run in Hollywood where all the love stories ended with people going apart. Like that was the ending they decided. And I get it. I get it. But as someone who has been very much in love with one person for a long time and how important that is, it is nice sometimes to have stories where they focus on the value of love, romantic and otherwise. And I assume this was based. You had to have had your own experience of it in some way that was meaningful to you. I know you probably are you still with a partner? You're with somebody still, or
Yes,
doing that
I've
kid on
been
your
with,
own?
I met my now husband in college. We've been together 20 years. My parents
Wow.
had a long-term love.
Yeah.
I love this idea of holding space for someone over many years, being a witness to them over many years, evolving with them or not. And I think of course, love is complex, and Jane and Abe's relationship is not without bumps,
Of
certainly,
course.
but at its core, it's deeply respectful and reciprocal and supportive. And it's been interesting trying to find comps for this book because happy marriages are hard to come by in literature.
Yes.
No.
Well, what is it? The Dostoevsky quote? Is it Dostoevsky, the quote about happy families? And
Yeah.
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 Well, yes, it's true. Don't you love finding comps? That's what I'm going through right now with the book we're going to go out with, and it kind of drives me crazy. It's like these books, but it's nothing like them, but it's like them, but it's nothing like them.
Totally. My publicist said something really smart, which is she said, offer books that people will like if they liked your book.
Yeah, yeah.
And feel better. But it's really hard to do, and especially in this kind of this happy marriage genre that I find myself in.
But you know what? Here's the thing about romantic love, which I think is so profound. And because I always said about my wife, Jen, the decision to be with her was the decision against which all my decisions are measured. In other words, that's what a right decision feels like. It's a choice that almost doesn't feel like a choice. But I feel like there's something so only, it's not, you are choosing to be with somebody and it's so specific to you and it's so unique to you. It's a creative choice. It's a life choice, most often, not always, that I think it's such a profound decision that says so much about that it's made apart from your family, apart from your friends. It's so specific to you and this other person. I just think the power of it can't be understated, really, at least in my life.
That's so true. I'm so happy you have that. I love talking about that. As a child, I was an only child, and so I spent a lot of time with my parents and felt like we were really a unit. And when my father got sick, my mother took care of him. She was really his caretaker.
Right.
And I remember saying to her, many years after he had gotten sick and after she had really done so much for him, I said, it must be the saddest point in your relationship, watching him kind of just lose himself in this way. And she said, no, actually, it's the most intimate part in our relationship. And I remember feeling like how much I misunderstood their relationship. Everybody stands outside of a relationship.
That's right.
Um, and we can't know. And there can be so much beauty even in the things that we can't know. I completely misunderstood her interpretation and her experience. And I'm so glad that I did.
Well, and the thing is, as you know, your kids are younger. I'm
I have a 5-year-old daughter.
well, you look like you're 15, but my ability
I'm
to,
turning 40 this year. I'm
well,
so glad to hear
oh
that.
my goodness. Okay. I don't know what to even do with that. Okay. So how old are your kids? I'm sorry.
I have a daughter who's 5.
Okay. Oh, all right. All right. So there
I'm
you
in the
go.
sweet spot.
Yeah. Enjoy it. But you won't, it's hard to know now because she's so young, but I think as a parent, you got to keep stuff from your kid in terms of your relationship is not, I still remember when I got married and my parents divorced. So I was talking to my mom. They divorced when I was quite young. But my mom said to me, and we were getting ready to have kids, remember, your relationship is the most important one in the house. Totally agree. But you can't share it with them in a lot of ways. It's yours. It's not theirs. They shouldn't know everything about it, I think, because it's for a lot of, obvious reasons. But beyond that, I just think it doesn't belong to them, right? It
Yeah, and
belongs
I
to
think
you.
especially for an only child, I mean, she picks up on everything. She's just a very intuitive kid. And so if there are ebbs and flows, as there are, she will know them.
Oh, yes.
Does not need to know them. Not need to know anything except what she needs to know. And so I think that's really critical what you say.
Well, okay, so where did it start? Did it start with you just were interested because there's a crossover, there's a link, or there's obviously some similarities between these two characters and your parents in a couple different ways. But sometimes you start with two characters and you realize, oh, I think they're going to be like my parents. So where did it be? You knew you wanted to write about them, but why? Where did what brought your attention to these two people?
It's funny that I ended up writing this so-called love story. I mean, it's called This is a Love Story, and that's sort of hilarious to me because in the very beginning, it was really a story of illness. It was a story of
Right,
Jane
right.
and getting sicker and sicker, and Abe trying to kind of hold on to her and witness her as she got sicker and sicker and sort of bring back all those memories as a way to keep her from dying in his own head and heart. And so it really started as that. And I think I think like most writers, I write about the things that keep me up at night, and that is
Uh,
illness, that is grief, that is fear and anxiety and turmoil at losing the things that we love. But I found that the two characters were so compelling in their love for each other and their support for one another that it actually became a love story, a melancholic love story, but truly a romance and not
right,
so much about death. And I'm
right.
so glad that that's what it's become. The character of their son Max, he's tortured and he has such a hard time with love, but he too is trying. And I find increasingly that I'm drawn to the books that delve into humankind, the complexity of human nature, and the heartbreak of being a person, but they offer some light in the dark.
Oh, please. They have to. They have to. You know what's
Yeah.
so funny about that? You have a kid and you're going to read that kid books. We don't subject our children what we subject ourselves to in storytelling sometimes. You would never tell a kid a story where there is nothing gained at the end.
Mhm.
And I have actually pretty strong feelings about that. I sometimes feel like I get tragedy or the perception of tragedy, but everybody dies. I hate to, it's what's going to happen. But I sometimes feel like that darkness that so many artists are drawn to is the middle of the story, not the end. I don't think it's the end. I think the end is always light. It always is, in my experience. I had a hard time. I read a lot of the modernist fiction writers, loved them, and then I fell in love, and it was a very romantic story because we weren't going to be together, and then we were, and I'd say happily ever after in the complex nature of it. But I couldn't read the modernist novels in quite the same way because I was like, well, love is not just tragic. It isn't because that's not been my experience of it, and I can't see it as just all loss and longing and all that way. I just can't see it that way anymore.
Yeah, I wonder, I mean, everybody's going to hate me at my publishing house for saying this, but I wonder if certain people will have a hard time with my book because it does offer a lovely view of love. And I think for people who don't have that, I don't know if it will be a hard read for them. And again, not that their love is not complex. Of course it is. And it contains jealousy and infidelity and feelings of inferiority, feelings of isolation at times. But at its heart, it is uplifting and hopeful. And for those people who don't know what that's like, I don't know.
Well, I think everybody wants it, wants to feel close to someone, wants to feel safe with someone. But there are also people, I think, Jessica, who just want to be alone.
Yeah.
That maybe, whether they're willing to admit it, because it seems they they like company, but at the end of the day, they want to do what they want to do when they want to do it, and that's not what relationships are really about, right?
I think that that's true. I think there's also people who just want to remain in a contentious state. And I feel like
Ah, yeah,
the world is so contentious, as you know, like things are on fire. There are storms where there shouldn't be. Everything is so chaotic. And so to have a little bit of a reprieve in an honest way, in an honest and an unfiltered way, feels life-giving.
totally. Don't you dare apologize for offering people a little bit of light. We want it. We want it. Remember, the darkness is just a shadow across the light. That's where it comes from. It's not permanent. I'm sorry, but it's not. Well, that's great. So, all right. I said my favorite parts are beginnings and struggles, and it sounds like the struggle was what is the discovering what the book actually was.
Oh yeah, I mean, I thought that this was going to be a very niche, very tiny, very unpublishable book because
Oh,
I
great.
like books like I know. I love books like that. I love those kind of really small, contained, insular books. I find them so beautiful. And so I thought that was what this book was going to be for a long time. And then I had a conversation with a friend, Liz Moore, who everybody knows, who wrote God of the Woods, and she said this feels like only part of the love story. And that's
Ooh.
when the other characters came in, and that's when I had that really uh, incredible burst of creativity that lasted
Oh,
3, where the length tripled. I think it just allowed me to kind of think about the book in a different way, to think about it in a less contained way, in a more expansive way.
wow. What a great. So it was the conversation with Liz Moore. I'm sure it was longer than that, but did it really just take that one little pinprick to free something up in your head, or did she have to really talk you into it?
No, no, outrageously, it took the pinprick.
Yeah.
Because I should have, I mean, I think probably after all my years of teaching, I probably should have been able to see it for myself, but I was really in a spiral. I think for
Yeah.
so long, I wanted this book to work, and this book had had many iterations. I mean, originally it was told from the perspective of who became Jane. She was much younger. It it took me years. Apricots came out 12 years ago now, nearly
Wow.
12
It's been
years
12
ago.
years.
It's been 12 years. It's outrageous, but it is true.
Wow, this is the this I wrote fiction for a while, but it turned out memoir, personal is really my thing. But I liked fiction in a way, but that what you're describing is the part that drove me out of my mind. You know, that sense of like because it could be anything, it could be anything, it could be anything, and finding it and finding it and finding it. Wow, that is some endurance on your part, my dear, sticking with it through
Yeah,
all that.
I've got to be nuts, I think. But now I have to say, I feel like now I have so much stamina and I
Yeah.
have a really like an external sense, at least for now. I mean, I hope this sticks and watch this all fall apart very quickly, but I feel like I have an external sense of what is needed for my fiction. And I'm
Good.
grateful for that.
Maybe, yeah, because you know what was happening, it sounded like, is that pinprick was you were resisting the book, what the book wanted to be. For whatever reason, you got something in your head. And I think all artists, we have to learn this. I'm still learning it. There's the difference between what I want and what the book wants. And sometimes I have fooled myself in saying, oh, I'm doing what the book wants, but you can feel the difference. You know, there is a difference to it, right? There's an allowing as opposed to a sort of, and hopefully, maybe taking forward, you can feel that difference and be more aware of it early on, maybe.
Yeah, and I think also it can't be understated what it is to have a writing community. I mean, I had one, I was part of an MFA program, and some of my dearest friends come from that place. And I think we all just kind of got busy, had kids, and I moved away from my first agent. I'm now with an agent who I hope will be with me for the rest of my life. I adore her and value her immensely. And I feel like now I have people that I trust and rely on, and I won't do it again. I won't do the whole thing alone again because it's
Okay.
useless. It's so hard. It's very isolating, and I think it's just kind of like tricks you into thinking you're doing the right thing because you're working hard.
Right. Now, it's not, yeah, that's true. I'm toiling away, but
Yes.
you aren't chopping wood. This is not, there's such a, I talked to Andre Debus about this. I love the guy. He loves to talk about this sort of spiritual aspect of writing. And there's such a sense of you have to give up control. You have to give up control in this one way for to allow it to happen. And as adults, we're sort of taught to learn to try to be in control, kind of, but you really have to give it up, don't you?
You do, and that's when the beauty happens. I mean, I
Yeah.
feel that the
Yeah.
most spiritual, if we want to use that word,
Use it.
um,
I'm
the most,
okay. Use
yeah,
it.
I mean, even like the most blessed moments I've had in my life have been those moments where I've said, where I haven't even said anything, where the characters have said, where the
That's right.
landscape has said, where the book has said, this is what we need to be. And all I've done is transcribe.
Yeah.
That is the best. That is what we all hope for as writers, what we live for.
I totally agree. Tell my clients that's how you're doing it right. When you know you're doing it right when your characters will not obey you and you listen to them. And I also
Exactly.
think I wrote about this and it because there was a certain thing that happened in November that left me unhappy, and maybe a lot of people. And so I was uh, writing about loss because that was on people's mind. But the thing, to me, the antidote to the concept of loss is creativity, because I feel like creativity comes from a place that can't be touched, can't be taken from me. That where it cannot be, because it's from me out, and that can't be lost unless I choose to ignore it. And so nothing solves it like just a day of work of like good creative work like you just described, where something comes through you, you feel like you have company even though you're alone, you feel like you disappear. It's
It makes
great.
me want to clap when you say that. It's so true. And I think, one of the hard parts about writing a novel is that those days come few and far between. You dedicate yourself again and again to this very large scale project. And so
I,
I think it's a really nice thing to just give yourself a break and just say, I'm going to work on this one thing. It's a small thing, whatever it is, I'm going to do it every day. I've offered this writing prompt subscription service since just before my daughter was born. So now it's been over 5 years. And
Oh,
you'll get these prompts in their writing prompts in their inbox every Wednesday morning at 8 a.m. And they either
nice.
respond, they don't, they think about it or they don't. But it's so satisfying to have something to write towards, something creative to work towards. It satisfies the most profound part of us, I think.
I love it. Okay, so if our listeners want to subscribe, our viewers want to subscribe to your prompt, how do they do it?
They can go on my website and just click subscribe, and I think there's a prompt button, and they'll find themselves there.
Now, do you ever come Tuesday where you have to come up with a prompt, think, I got nothing. Figure it out yourself, people.
Never. I will say last week was the first week that I messed up the schedule for the first time in 5 years, and I thought,
Oh,
oh, this book thing is really doing it to me.
wow.
Um, but it's okay. Everybody got double prompts this week, so
Okay, good.
everyone's okay.
Hey, I like the idea of it. People, that's a good idea. Check it out. JessicaSoffer.com,
Yes.
.org. I can't remember. I was just on the website. Okay. All right. Well, listen, the book is This is a Love Story. It's a good story. Uh, it's okay, people. It's okay to be happy. You know you want to be, but you got to go through the dark to get there, but it's okay. It's okay. Uh, so congratulations. Uh, Good luck, but I'm not done with you. I'm not done with you just yet. I got one more question. And I want you to think about all the writing you've done from your journals when you're a little girl to your pieces about fashion and lifestyle to, of course, these novels, short stories. And if all this writing has taught you anything about being human, about life, what's it taught you?
Gosh. I mean, I think that life and writing are inextricable, at least for me. That writing is so incredibly life-giving, and life is what gives to art. And so if one can find the thing that they love to do, they will find that it will give back to life and life will give to it in this totally synchronistic, beautiful way. I can't imagine like what is life without writing? That's what I think at this point. How would I capture the emotion? How would I stay in my body without writing? And also, what would writing be without the full spectrum of life?